This is the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, here to help you navigate and thrive with ADHD in adulthood. I'm your host, Xena, and I was diagnosed at age 36. As with many ADHDers, I have a rebellious and nonconformist style, and that means that there will likely be swearing in the coming episode. Please be mindful of any little people. Hi friends, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And when I say recently, it was approximately 6 months ago at the time of recording this. Having said that, I have assumed for approximately 2 years that I had ADHD based on conversations with friends who have ADHD and research that I had done myself. And I had done extensive research, and there are many online tests, as you will likely know, that will self-diagnose you. However, this has been one hell of a journey. It's been both validating and incredibly eye-opening. So in the coming episodes, I'm going to share a lot of what I have learned with you all. So in order to get diagnosed with ADHD, you must book in with a medical professional. Here in New Zealand and in many countries, you will need to be diagnosed by a psychiatrist. So I want to start out by saying I am not a medical professional at the time of recording this. I am a 36-year-old female who was diagnosed with ADHD 6 months ago. I am sharing my own personal experience and what I have learned through extensive research over the past 2 to 3 years, and what I have witnessed from coaching clients over the past 7 years who also have ADHD. So in this first episode, I am going to share with you some of the symptoms that I experience and some of the things that you may notice or experience yourself, and how I knew I had ADHD. I also want to run you through the process of getting diagnosed and what that looks like. So before I do that, I want to address a couple of the common misconceptions that I have heard whilst telling friends and family about my ADHD diagnosis. Now, ADD or ADHD, as it is now called, is widely thought of as, that little boy who is at school and can't sit still and is disrupting everybody. That is what so many people picture when I say ADHD. And it seems that many people have that picture in their heads. That's what they associate ADHD with. Now, just in case you don't know, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Okay, so many people picture that little boy at school who's being hyperactive and disruptive in the classroom. But what they usually don't picture when we say ADHD is a grown adult, especially a female. So I have heard things like, is this just temporary? Like, aren't you going to grow out of it? Isn't it just a phase you're going through? Are you still going to have it next year? And why do you need medication if you've been fine for this long? So, we'll address a few of these. So, ADHD is hereditary, meaning it is passed down through generations in your family. So, in the majority of cases, that is how you will have got your ADHD. Now, I also want to mention that in a small minority of people, it can be brought upon by severe trauma. Okay? So to speak to some of the things that you may be hearing as you tell friends and family, no, it is not a phase. We have had it all of our lives. We do not grow out of it. And medication is one of many options that are available to us. And we are going to talk more about that in our coming episodes. So the reason I sought out diagnosis was because although I had assumed and decided I had ADHD, and I was working with a lot of the things I had learned and the strategies that I had discovered, I got to this place mid 2022, where I was struggling big time, and I started to think that there was something wrong with me. I couldn't finish anything. I felt like I was constantly all over the place. And I was more frustrated than ever before. Frustration and irritation had become like my state of being. It didn't matter how happy everyone else was around me or how good life was going. I was pretty much pissed all of the time. Irritable, highly irritable all the time. And my memory had just gotten so bad, like so bad. I was full of all of these great ideas and super excited about, different projects in my business, but I could never either execute them or finish them. I was constantly getting distracted. I would refer to it as my squirrel brain, and I was like ding, 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 here, there, and everywhere, chasing the shiny, bright objects all the time. So as it so happens, I later found out that it is actually incredibly common for females aged between 36 to 38 to get diagnosed, because this is around the time that our bodies begin to enter into perimenopause. I know that was a shock for me to learn. But what happens around that time of our life is our hormones begin to change. And when our hormones begin to change, it can ramp up our symptoms. Okay, so some of the things that we may have been managing before and some of the coping strategies and tools that we had in place before may not be working so well or really working at all if this is the case. Okay, hence we seek out help. So that's exactly what happened to me. Now, the other time that women often get diagnosed is when they leave school or college, as you may say in America, right? When you're finishing university and entering into the workforce. A lot of women in that time period find themselves struggling with adjusting to that new way of life. Hence, they seek out diagnosis then also. Okay. So, as I said earlier, in order to be diagnosed, it can only be done through a medical professional. Whether that be a doctor, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist, it varies from country to country. As I said, the majority of the time from the research I have done and what I've learned, it seems to be a psychiatrist will do that. Now, if you think you might have ADHD, I highly recommend that you book in to have a conversation with your doctor, with a medical professional. Now, in saying that, I'm going to be fully transparent right the way throughout this podcast, okay? So I wanted to share what happened when I visited my local GP. I made the appointment and I went along, and my regular female doctor was unavailable. However, I was able to get an appointment with a male doctor who I knew. I had actually grown up with his daughters. I'd gone to primary school with them. So he knew me and had known me since I was quite young. So I went along, I had this appointment with him, and I said to him, hey, I think I have ADHD and I would like to get a referral to a psychiatrist, please, for a diagnosis. And he scoffed at me. He was like, huh? What? What makes you think you have that? He kind of like laughed me off. And that was kind of disappointing, I must say, because it was a bit of a struggle to advocate for myself already, having come from, a relationship where my partner's like, what the heck? Why do you think you have that? So it was almost like I was being brushed off by a lot of people who really had a lack of awareness around what ADHD is, what it looks like, and how it presents. Okay. So I just want to offer you that in case you get a similar response from anyone. Okay. I had to advocate for myself, and I did get the referral that I asked for. And I have gone on to hear many similar stories from our ADHDers in the community where they were scoffed at or laughed at, or, that kind of a response was given by the medical professionals whom they reached out to. Okay. So that's not going to be the case all the time. I just want to offer it. All right. If you think you have ADHD, please do advocate for yourself. Okay. Especially with the lack of awareness from many GPs, especially around females with ADHD. Okay, that is the largest growing population of ADHDers right now. There is what they are referring to as a lost generation of women with ADHD who are now being discovered. Okay, oh, my heart goes out to all of you. So, also, just so you know, ADHD impacts women equally as much as men. It is the same rate. However, there have been more males diagnosed thus far. Okay, and it also impacts 1 in 20 people. So 1 in 20 people on this planet walking around have got ADHD. Who knew? So what does ADHD look like in adults? I have compiled a list of symptoms, and I'm going to share what they look like for me to better help kind of illustrate them and put them into stories, which I think is how we all learn. So this list of symptoms, however, is based on the work of a couple of very well-known professionals in the field of ADHD. Now, to make this simple for you all, I have written these out on my website along with a list of names and resources for ADHD from experts, okay? So if you want to get access to that, if you want to have a look at it and skim through these symptoms, you can head over to xenajones.com/ADHD. It's really important you put the /ADHD in there. Otherwise, you won't be able to find this webpage. Okay? I'll link it in the show notes too, just to make it super easy. Okay? So, here are the symptoms, or some of the symptoms, and the categories that they can fall under. Impulsivity. So that might look like interrupting people, making quick decisions, jumping to conclusions, having very little patience, and reacting quickly. So for me, interrupting people is something I have done my whole life, and man, does it piss some people off. And it's not because I want to piss them off. It's like I have an inability to stop myself from interrupting. I will blurt things out before I've had conscious time to process what is about to happen. Okay? That is such a common one for me. Very little patience. I don't think I have any. You could ask anyone in my life and they will probably agree with you. Jumping to conclusions, yes. Another thing to speak to that many ADHDers experience is being highly sensitive to rejection. There is a thing we will talk about in coming episodes called RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, which impacts many people with ADHD. So highly sensitive to reaction, and therefore we can jump to a lot of conclusions and assume the worst. Okay. Emotional regulation, or challenges more so in terms of emotional regulation. So perhaps you seem to get more upset than other people. You can be highly sensitive. I know I am. Hold on to your emotions, right? You're one of those people who hold a grudge. I am. Then there you go. Struggle to let go of things. Get frustrated easily and often. As I said earlier, I spent so much of last year in a constant state of frustration, irritability, and just general pissed offness. Can be perceived as moody. Gosh, I remember working in a job a few years ago, and my colleague, whom I loved and adored and had been working with for a few years, we had great fun working together. One day she looked at me and she said, "Man, you're moody." And I took great offense to that, and I became very pissed off. However, I reflected on it, and although I never said it to her, I think she was definitely right. Another one here is feel things more intensely than others. Have you ever thought that you feel things more intensely than others? That could be a sign of ADHD. Can be explosive with your emotions. Another category here is distracted. So can't seem to finish things, always getting distracted. I referred to like squirrel brain before, where you're kind of pinging from one thing to the next all over the place. Another one here, unable to block out the thoughts in your mind. So if your mind is constantly feeling like it's racing and overthinking and always going, that can actually, I have learned that can actually impact our sleep. So my psychiatrist said to me, during our initial consultation, she said, "How well do you sleep?" And I said, "I think I sleep fine. But, sometimes like my mind will be a bit busy." And I have now learned that I can actually sleep a lot better. I just didn't know any different. Okay, we'll talk about this more. Don't you worry. Jumping from one thing to the next and not finishing anything, right? So task hopping. That was me for so much of last year. I had all of these wonderful grand plans and amazing things I wanted to do because as ADHDers, we're often not short of ideas. We can be very creative. However, I wouldn't finish anything. Anytime something becomes hard or challenging, we will often look for a distraction or go and do something different. Getting lost in your own thoughts when reading a book and not being able to recall what you just read. Guys, that one was huge for me. In all of 2022, I was only able to read one book. Now, prior to that, I think my record for a year might have been maybe 4. We are in, at the time of recording this, early April of 2023. I've read 4 books already, and we're like just a third of the way through the year. What the heck? But the trouble that I had when I was reading a book is I would be reading the page and thinking about something else. My brain would be occupied elsewhere, and then I would not be able to recall what I read. So the next night I would pick up the book and I would go to read it, and I'd be like, what is this on about? And I would have to go back again because I couldn't remember what I had read the night before. And again, so frustrating. Now, some people with ADHD can concentrate when they really enjoy something. We can get hyper fixated on a task and lose all track of time and completely go down a rabbit hole. But when something is boring for us, we're out, we're done. We're off looking for something else. Okay. Now, you may experience some of these and not others. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So another category is restlessness. Okay. Struggling to relax, always need to be doing something. Fidgeting, trouble sitting still, and unable to switch off when on holiday. I went with my partner a couple of years ago to the Cook Islands, to Rarotonga, and we were there for a week and very little internet access. I struggled because this is like go slow mode. I struggled to switch off. I was constantly trying to do things, to move around. I could not sit still. It was kind of painful, if I'm honest. It's not like a fond memory that I have of a holiday because I struggled. Now my partner is complete opposite. He loved it, didn't have to do anything, could lie around all day, read books, just chill. He thought it was fun, fantastic, and it's one of his favorite memories ever, one of his favorite holidays, right? But for those of us who refer to ourselves as active relaxers, that is a really common thing for ADHD. So that fidgeting, trouble sitting still, that's another one that's huge for me. I have a bunch of fidget spinners and, squishy balls and all sorts of different things here in my office, as well as in my handbag too. But often what it can look like is, always drinking a coffee or grabbing some water or having a pen in your hand. Or for me, it was like twisting my rings on my fingers or playing with my hair tie that might be sitting on my wrist or touching my necklace around my neck. Always doing something, picking up a phone, like constantly having to touch or do something. Another category here is time challenges. So that may look like being unable to correctly estimate how long a task will take you, running late, putting things off to the very last minute. I know when I was at school, and because study to me was just so boring and it was so hard and I just didn't want to do it and it wasn't enjoyable, I would wait until the night before an exam and stay up super late trying to cram everything in. Okay, putting things off to the last minute. Procrastinating frequently. Yep. Also thinking that you have more time than you do. So it's an inability. It's called time blindness, which, my friends, is a whole nother episode for itself, where you think that you have more time than you do. All right, losing track of time is another one here. To speak to this inability to correctly estimate how long a task will take, to give you an idea, on Monday of this week, I ran a 1-hour masterclass, and I had allotted in my calendar 1 week prior to running it, I had allotted 2 hours to finish the keynote presentation. And when I say finish, I had already had a draft and an outline, and I knew the key points that I was going to include. So I felt like a lot of the decisions and the structure was already in place. However, that 2 hours spanned into or took up 6 days in the end. In amongst all of my other work that I was doing in my client calls, etc., it spread across 6 days. I was literally working on it the night before I was giving the class. And after learning about this time blindness and this inability to correctly estimate how long a task will take, I was like, wow, I've been doing that for years. I just had no idea that it had a name and it was a thing. All right. Another category here is starting and finishing. So struggling to do things simply because you should do them, or having a hard time getting started on a task, right? That can be such a challenge, is actually starting. I know it can be such a challenge for me to actually start on something, especially if it's not easy or requires a lot of effort and my brain perceives it as hard. It can be a real challenge. Okay. Not being able to finish things that aren't interesting. Guys, my hand is raised. You also can't resist the urge to do things that are more interesting or fun. Okay. So if something is more interesting or fun, I know in workplaces I have had this. So years ago I worked in a fashion company, and you would be doing like, say restocking shelves with clothes, what have you. And anytime the new stock would come in, I would literally drop what I was doing and run over and start working on it. And sometimes I would get in trouble because I hadn't finished what I was doing and somebody else was assigned on that task. But it was so much more interesting and fun. All right, another category here is poor working memory. So perhaps that might look like you're unable to remember what you were just about to do. That one happens to me all the time. Leaving projects unfinished. Can't recall names of people or places. Guys, that one is huge for me. I struggle when I meet new people to remember their names. Okay, so social anxiety or anxiety in general is very common for people with ADHD. So when we're in a social setting, it's not helped when we struggle to remember the names of people. Even when, and this was me, right? I went and learned a bunch of different tactics and ideas for ways to remember people's names, such as, associating it to somebody else that you know, or associating it to something else in your life, or, repeating it back a million times or saying it straight back to them. There's all these different things that they offer you. None of that worked for me. And as soon as I learned I had ADHD and this was part of, a symptom of having ADHD, I was like, there we go. It all makes sense now. So again, that was can't recall names of people or places, get distracted, and forget to go back to things. Another thing I'm going to add that was really interesting when I had my appointment with the psychiatrist is she asked me the question of, did you have an eating disorder at any stage in your life? And yes, I did. As a teenager around, I think it was sort of ages 17 to 19-ish, I struggled with bulimia. And she informed me, and this is something I've also read in the research, that eating disorders are actually quite common for people with ADHD. So the official diagnosis criteria for ADHD is broken into 2 categories. So inattention, so inattentive, right? Struggling to hold your attention on something. And then the other one is hyperactive or impulsive. Okay. Now, I wanted to offer you this because I love it. Having ADHD is like having a race car, a Formula One race car with bicycle brakes. Okay. I can't remember where I read this, and I will find it again. Surprise, surprise, can't remember. But I will credit that to, it was one of the doctors in one of the books I've read. So I will credit that at some point in a future episode. But he describes us as ADHD as having, basically being a race car. Like, we have these incredible abilities. However, our brakes don't work so well, and we need to work on strengthening our brakes. Okay? Don't worry, we're going to talk so much more about that in coming episodes. That being said, there are two books that I highly recommend, which have helped me hugely on my journey. So these are from ADHD professionals, and they also lay out the diagnostic criteria and give a lot more detail on what life with ADHD is like. Okay, so the first one is Taking Charge of Adult ADHD by Dr. Russell Barkley. And the second one is ADHD 2.0, which is actually sitting right next to me. And that is by Edward Hallowell and John Ratty. Some other symptoms that are quite common for those of us with ADHD are being disorganized and messy, struggling with cleaning and getting the house in order and life in order, being terrible with money and often forgetting to pay bills, and also getting into debt. Okay, those are pretty common for those of us with ADHD. So, as I said, I have compiled a list of those symptoms and the recommended resources about adult ADHD, which you can find over on my website, xenajones.com/ADHD, and just make sure to add the /ADHD. So what I want to do is just let you know about what's going to happen over the coming episodes, okay? I am going to be talking about medication, my experience and what I have learned. I'm going to be talking about how our brains are different and understanding what it means to have ADHD. We're going to talk about support systems, how to create or find a community of people who get it. Also, speaking the lingo, there are some wild terms in the ADHD world. So I want to break those down and help us to better understand what it all means and how it relates. I want to talk about some of the superpowers that we have with ADHD. So all of the ways that it can actually serve us in the world. I also want to visit, as I said before, RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, things that you need to know about executive functioning. So that is one of the areas that we struggle with ADHD, is the executive functioning areas of the brain. I want to talk about emotional regulation, being highly sensitive, how the female hormones impact ADHD, and a whole host more. Friends, I got ideas coming out the wazoo. What even does that mean? Who knows? All right. If this has been helpful, please hit subscribe and share it with your ADHD friends. Thank you so much for listening to our very first episode. Huge love. Hey, if you loved this episode, then come and join us inside the Navigating Adult ADHD Facebook community. Head over to my website, xenajones.com/ADHD. Make sure you add the /ADHD to get access to this group and for further resources and support. I'll see you inside.